Hello, this is an estate and gift tax online module. We've been talking about the gross estate, and now we'll look at some cases involving retained life estates. I am Professor Donna Byrne at William Mitchell College of Law. Thanks for watching with me. Okay, let's review just a little bit. We looked at Section 2036A1 in the previous module and saw that it has really three main parts. The decedent made a transfer of the property during life. The decedent retained possession or retained a right to income, and that was retained for the decedent's life or something very similar to it. In this presentation, we'll look at some cases where retaining possession is really not that clear. The first three cases we're looking at all involve a personal residence in which the decedent continued to live after transferring it during life. And then the fourth one takes us back to the issue of support, where there's a legal obligation. So let's talk about the estate of Rapelier, or Rapelier, or Rappelje, depending on who you are and where you live. Apparently there's a town with this name in Montana. Adrian Rappelje transferred title to his home to his two adult daughters, Priscilla and Helen. Priscilla Wright and Helen Mulligan. The court refers to them as Mrs. Wright and Mrs. Mulligan. This was a gift. He reported it as a taxable gift. May or may not have paid gift tax on it, depending on whether he'd used up his lifetime exemption. And then he lived there for about 3 more months and then went off to Florida for the winter. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so far he made a gift, he left. He even looked into buying a house in Florida while he was there. And decided, nah, Saratoga Springs is the place to be. So he went back home, and then he had a stroke. And so that things kind of changed. This was pretty serious. He was paralyzed on one side. He actually only lived for 3 more years, but he lived in that old house the whole time. And at one point his grandniece came to stay with him for a while with her husband. His granddaughter came for a while, and for part of the time he lived there by himself. Now, our question is, when he gave the house to his daughters, did he retain possession for life? Or did he really give it to them altogether, and they are now just letting him live there? That's a tough question, right? It would be a little easier if he had bought the house in Florida and couldn't live there because of the stroke, and so they're letting him live in the house. But the timing just wasn't really very clear. So here are some more facts that came out in the case. He continued to pay the property tax. He never paid rent. He did pay most of the utilities, just as if he continued to own it, although his daughter paid some of them. And there was no rental agreement. The daughters didn't ever try to sell the house, and they didn't even try to live in it. So were they acting like owners with a right to possession? All right, so this is one of those cases where it was really relevant. Who has the burden of proof? When there's not very much to go on, the burden of proof makes all the difference. And in this case, the taxpayers have the burden of proof. They have to show that there was not an agreement to allow him to keep possession, that it was not the intention for him to transfer the house but keep it for life, because there just wasn't much here, so the taxpayers don't sustain their burden of proof. That means the whole value of the house is included in Adrian's gross estate. Now, he did pay the gift tax when he gave his daughter's title, right? He did treat it as a gift. And so if he actually had to pay tax, don't worry. Even though we're including the same property in the estate, we'll give him a credit for the tax that was paid. What's at issue here is any appreciation in value from when he made the gift. So if he made a gift and claimed all of it then, but now it's worth a lot more, Now we're going to pay tax on that extra value as well. Okay, so let's go on to the next one, estate of Reezy. Okay, this was kind of clever tax planning. Sylvia Reezy transferred her home to a qualified personal residence trust. Now, we don't really need to know very much about this because this trust went for 7 years and then it ended. And when the trust ended, the property was supposed to go to 2 other trusts for Sylvia's daughters. The old trust didn't actually transfer the property to the new trusts. Sylvia didn't actually transfer the property to the new trusts, but under the terms of it, the title is supposed to go for the benefit of the daughters at this point. So that's all we really need to know about that QPRT, the Qualified Personal Residence Trust. That's in the past. Our problem is Sylvia kept living in the house. Same thing again. She transferred the house and she kept living in it. So these people had advice of counsel, and their lawyer said, charge rent. And how do we know how much? Call some realtors to find out how much. Okay, so we're going to do that. But it's the holiday season. It's November. We're busy. Thanksgiving is coming. And so they didn't quite get around to it in time, and Sylvia suffered a stroke and died unexpectedly before Thanksgiving. Wow. So here's the question. Did she retain possession? It's really the same issue as in Raypollier. Or did the daughters let her live there after she transferred it, after that trust came to an end? And I think the time frame was about 6 months. Well, here we've got the same kinds of additional facts. She paid the property tax, the insurance, the upkeep, the maintenance. A note about insurance. Insurance tells you who's bearing the risk. So if she paid insurance, then she's carrying the risk of loss to the house. She did not pay rent. They did not have a lease or rental agreement, although it sounds like they were planning to do that. When she died, the estate took over until the house was sold. And the trusts for the daughters really didn't do anything. So what do you think? Does it look like she kept the house until her death? Or was there an implied understanding that she could stay there for free? Because if there was, then she retained possession. On the other hand, if the daughters really were renting to her and they just hadn't quite finalized things, then maybe she had really given it to them completely. Now, in this case, the taxpayers win. They were able to convince the court that they really did intend a rental agreement. It helped that they had talked to their lawyer and said, how do we do this? And so they convinced the court that they really were trying to do this, and the court concludes that she did not retain possession. Okay. Now, I think this was kind of a close call for the taxpayers, and it shouldn't really have happened. If they went to all this trouble to set up a QPRT, there should have been a lease agreement ready to go when that trust came to an end. Okay, so our third residence case, estate of Maxwell. Now, in this one, this also has some pretty clever tax planning. Lydia sold her house to her son and daughter-in-law. But look how they did it. The price was $270,000, and right away she forgave $20,000. That was 2 times the annual exclusion amount. So she could give $10,000 to each of them. So she forgave that amount. Doesn't even count. Being relieved of debt is like receiving cash, and that means that it is a gift of a present interest. The annual exclusion applies, no gift tax consequences. And if you think about it, she could do that every year. Let's see, they still owe $250,000. So at $20,000 a year, that'd be another 12 or 13 years. And then she would have given them the whole house with no gift tax consequences. Nice. Yeah. Okay. But meanwhile, they do still owe $250,000. And so they executed a mortgage. Essentially, they borrowed the $250,000 from her. This is seller financing. This is okay. People do this. They used to do it more, but we can do seller financing. And then she rented the house from them. Okay, so that's kind of cool too. Because of the way she set this up, they now own a rental property. The rent would be a little bit of income for them. Of course, they're paying for the property with a mortgage and paying interest. But we call this a sale and leaseback. And what this does is it changes who gets to take depreciation. The buyer, who ends up being the owner, even though they haven't really paid for it yet, gets the depreciation on the property, as well as other deductions for expenses. Okay, so what's the problem here? Well, it's kind of that we've got the rent and the interest going back and forth between the same people. So a lot of times when we do a sale and lease back, we don't get seller financing. We go get the financing from a bank, and then we lease it back to the seller, and that works just fine. So look at the amounts. Lydia did pay rent, and here are the amounts: $16,084, $22,000 and $85, and $12,500 and $86. And they paid interest: 16 something and 84, almost 21 and 85, and almost 12 and 86. The amounts aren't exact, but they're really close, and they kind of cancel each other out. In addition, she did forgive the $20,000 every year, so they never paid back any of the principal. So it seems like she kind of just gave them the house, but kept the right to live in it, doesn't it? They dressed it up very nicely. The tax court found that there was an understanding, at least implied, that she would continue to reside in her home until her death. The standard for overthrowing that is clearly erroneous. The court says that was not clearly erroneous. It was not a bona fide sale for adequate and full consideration. Now, that means that 2036 applies and the house is included in the gross estate. You should go back and look at the opinion and go through the part where the court shows why it arrived at its conclusion. There's also a dissent. Why did the dissent disagree on this? Okay, we've got one more, not very much time, and that's estate of Goki. Now, just a little bit of a background. If decedent puts money in a trust and the trust has to pay income for the decedent's obligations during life, that's the same as keeping the income, right? Or the same as having the income paid to me and then I pay my obligations. Now, in Goki, the trusts were for the benefit of minor children, and the trustee was to use the income for support, care, welfare, and education. If the children are under 21, Mr. Goki still has an obligation to support them, so the trust really is doing what he has to do if this language means support. So, did he keep the money in this form for the rest of his life? Unfortunately, yes. He was 57 when he established the trusts, and he died when he was about 65. Two of the kids were still under 18. So he did retain the use of the income for life. How? By having the trust pay something that he was obligated to pay to support his minor children. Now there's also some nice analysis here of these phrases, of these words: support, care, welfare, and education. These make an ascertainable external standard. That's something a court can enforce, and we'll see this come up in other cases as well. Okay, we made it. I had to keep it under 15 minutes or I can't post it on YouTube. So, thank you for watching.